In 1994, 5 lifeless bodies were found inside this huge house in New Zealand, a discovery so chilling it became one of the strangest and most expensive criminal cases the country has ever faced.
They're all dead. What's the matter? They're all dead. I came home and they're all dead.
That panicked voice you just heard belongs to David Bain, the eldest son and the only survivor of what would soon be called the House of Horrors in New Zealand. Shockingly, David was later charged with 5 counts of murder for allegedly killing his entire family. He was just 22 years old at the time. Now, if you think that's where the story ends, think again. 19 years later, David walked free, and the reason why will leave you speechless. It's one of those cases that makes you question everything, and trust me, you'll want to grit your teeth and hang on until the very end. But before we dive into the shocking twists and turns, let's first take a closer look at the Bain family, the people at the heart of this chilling mystery.
More than 100 meters away from the fire, yet I can still feel the intense heat of the flames. The house was consumed by towering flames for more than an hour. The fire could be seen over most of the city. It burned 17 days after Arawa, Laniet and Stephen Cullen Bain were killed, along with parents Robin and Margaret.
By all appearances, the Bain family seemed like your typical religious family. David Cullen Bain was born on March 27, 1972, the first child of Robin Bain and Margaret Cullen. His parents had been married just 3 years earlier in 1969 and were deeply rooted in their faith and hopes for a peaceful, close-knit family life. But life had other plans. When David was only 2 years old, Robin's calling to serve as a missionary teacher took the family far from home. The Bains uprooted their lives and moved over 3,000 miles northwest to Papua New Guinea. It was a massive change, from the familiar streets of New Zealand to the tropical and often challenging environment of a remote island nation. Their family grew in size, too. David became the eldest of 4 siblings, with 2 sisters, Arawa and Laniet, born 3 and 4 years after him, and a younger brother, Stephen, arriving 8 years after David. In many ways, this should have been a time of joy and growth, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. While Robin threw himself into his missionary work, Margaret's spiritual path began to shift. She became fascinated by New Age spiritualism and the idea of channeling spirits, a stark contrast to the traditional religious values the family was raised with. Margaret became convinced that their family was under threat from dark, satanic forces and believed fiercely that they needed protection from these evil influences. This obsession created tension and fear within the household, adding a layer of mystery and unease that would only grow over time. Additionally, Robin's enthusiasm for his missionary work started to fade after several years. The dream that had brought the family to Papua New Guinea began to lose its luster, and by 1988, 14 years after their move, they returned to New Zealand. The family settled into a large house in Anderson's Bay, a quiet suburb of Dunedin on New Zealand's South Island. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but life at home was far from peaceful. In 1991, Robin took a job as the principal of a small rural school. On paper, this sounded promising, a stable job, a chance to rebuild a community. But back at the house, things were deteriorating rapidly. By 1994, the marriage between Robin and Margaret was hanging by a thread. The couple argued constantly, daily fights that wore down the family's spirit. Margaret's bitterness towards Robin had deepened so much that she reportedly made chilling comments about wanting to kill him. The tension wasn't just emotional, it was palpable in the state of their home. Visitors described the Bain household as a pigsty. The once grand house had become run-down and neglected. Broken windows, peeling paint, and clutter filled every corner. Unpleasant smells lingered in the air, a testament to the family's neglect and disarray. Robin was rarely there to help. During the week, he lived and slept in a caravan near the school, miles away from the chaos at home. On weekends, instead of joining the family inside, he stayed in another caravan parked in the garden. The emotional distance between the family members only grew wider. Worse, dark rumors swirled around Robin. There were whispers and accusations of abuse towards his youngest daughter, Lanyet. These claims cast a shadow over the family and would later become a key element in the case that shocked the nation. On the other hand, David's relationship with his father was tense and strained. In contrast, he was very close to his mother, Margaret, and they often shared grievances about Robin, united in their frustrations. At 22 years old, in 1994, David was trying to find his way. He was a music student with dreams of becoming an opera singer, an ambitious goal that set him apart from the typical path his siblings were on. Whether or not he had the talent for international fame is up for debate. But David's passion for music was real. Just take a look at this. Now, despite the turmoil at home, all 4 Bain children were involved in school or work. Arawa was training to be a teacher, Stephen was finishing high school, and Lanyet held a part-time job. However, David's path was a little more complicated. After struggling to fit in at university, he had dropped out for a time and even relied on unemployment benefits, but he eventually returned to university to study classical music, supporting himself by delivering newspapers in the early mornings, a humble job that required discipline and grit. Now, given all the details I told you about the Bain family, their fractured relationships, the strange beliefs, and the mounting tension, it's easier to understand just how complicated and heartbreaking this story really is. Families are supposed to be a place of safety and love, but for the Bains, things were anything but normal. By 1994, the bond between Robin and Margaret Bain was not just broken, it was shattered beyond repair. Margaret had become really convinced that Robin was possessed by a demon she called Bel. She also referred to her husband as a son of Belial, one of the 4 crown princes of hell. This wasn't some passing thought or simple fear. It was something she wrote about repeatedly in her diary, describing how she believed her husband was under the control of an evil spirit. Whether you see this as delusion or something else, the fact remains that it cast a dark shadow over their home and tore the family apart. Margaret's attempts to rid Robin of this demon often took the form of exorcisms, rituals meant to drive the evil out. Imagine living in a house where your mother is performing these terrifying ceremonies on your own father, while your father is forced to sleep outside in a camper van because he's essentially been banished from his own home. Robin's mental health suffered immensely under this strain. Colleagues at his school described him as a man who was depressed, withdrawn, and barely functioning, like a shell of the person he once was. Neglecting his own hygiene and appearing almost robotic, Robin seemed lost, trapped in a life that was falling apart around him. Meanwhile, the children found themselves caught in the middle of this toxic environment. David, Arawa, Lanyet, and Stephen each had their own complicated relationships with their parents and with each other. Some children sided more with their mother, others were closer to their father. The house, already cluttered and chaotic, was filled with tension and emotional pain. It was clear that the family was on the brink of collapse. And then, on the morning of Monday, June 20th, 1994, the unimaginable happened. At exactly 7:09 in the morning, David Bain made a frantic call to emergency services. his voice shaking as he uttered the words that would haunt New Zealand for years to come.
All dead.
What's the matter?
They're all dead. I came home and they're all dead.
Whereabouts are you?
Every street.
Or every street?
65 every street. They're all dead.
Who's all dead?
My family, they're all dead. Hurry up.
It's okay. Every street that runs off Somerville Street?
Yes.
What number are you calling from?
454. 2527.
454
2527.
2527. And your last name?
Bain.
Bain. Okay. We're on our way. Okay, Mr. Bain? Yeah, we'll be there very shortly.
As you can see, David stammered, trying to explain what he had found in his own home. His mother, sisters, and youngest brother were all dead. His father lay in the lounge, a bullet wound to the head. The family rifle was on the floor beside him, and chillingly, a typed message on the computer read, "Sorry, you are the only one who deserves to stay." When police arrived, they were confronted with a scene so grim and tragic that it was almost unimaginable. The family home was a mess as usual, but now it was stained with loss and violence. All 5 members of the Bain family were dead, victims of a brutal shooting that shocked the entire nation. The question everyone wanted answered was, who did this, and why? The initial theory seemed clear. The father, Robin, had killed his family before taking his own life. After all, he was found with the rifle nearby, and the message on the computer seemed like a last note. But this explanation quickly began to unravel. Forensic experts examined the bullet wound in Robin's head and declared it nearly impossible that he had shot himself. The trajectory and angle of the bullet, along with the blood patterns, suggested his body had been moved after death, casting doubt on the father theory. This twist in the investigation shifted suspicion towards David Bain. If Robin wasn't the killer, then why was David alive when everyone else in his family was dead? Why had he been spared? To add to the growing mystery, David's story just didn't quite add up. When officers first questioned him, he explained that he had completed his usual newspaper round between 6 o'clock and 6:42 in the morning. This timeline seemed straightforward enough, and a neighbor even confirmed to police that they saw David entering the Bain property at around 6:40 a.m. But here's where things get strange. David didn't call for help until 7:09 a.m., a full 24 minutes after he supposedly returned home. What happened during that gap? When pressed, David admitted he zoned out, unsure of what to do or how to react to the horror inside his own house. This delay immediately raised red flags for investigators, who wondered if something was being left out of his story. Adding more complexity to the case, David was unable to explain the fresh injuries on his forehead and knees. These wounds suggested some kind of recent struggle or accident, but he had no clear explanation. Even more incriminating was the fact that the gun found next to Robin's body actually belonged to David. He further admitted he was the only person who knew where the key to unlock the gun's safety mechanism was kept, knowledge that made him the prime suspect in the eyes of the police. With this mounting suspicion, it didn't take long for the authorities to detain David. Merely 4 days after the horrific massacre, he was arrested and charged with the murders of his entire family. Digital forensics played a crucial role in unraveling the tangled timeline of that tragic morning. It was discovered that the computer on which the final letter was typed had been switched on at 6:44 a.m., just 2 minutes after David reportedly arrived home. This suggested that the note had been composed shortly after his return, seemingly placing him at the scene during the time of the killings. Yet this evidence also raised questions. If David was home at 6:42 and the computer was on at 6:44, why the gap in calling emergency services? And why would he delay nearly a half hour before calling for help? In the days following the massacre, more evidence emerged that suggested Robin, the father, might have been innocent after all. Remarkably, no blood other than his own was found on him, not on his clothes, his socks, or his shoes, which he had worn that day. This was puzzling because if Robin had been the killer and had then shot himself, one would expect at least some transfer of blood to his clothing or hands. Moreover, Robin's fingerprints were completely absent from the rifle found beside him, a fact that forensic experts found hard to reconcile. If Robin had fired the fatal shots and then turned the weapon on himself, his fingerprints should have been all over the gun. To complicate matters further, no gunpowder residue was detected on his hands, a forensic detail that contradicted the idea of taking his own life. Despite all the mounting evidence casting doubt on Robin's guilt, the investigation took a dark turn just 17 days after the murders. The Bain family's relatives, deeply unsettled by the gruesome scene and concerned about the safety of the property, decided to take drastic action. Fearing that curious teenagers might break into the house and accidentally set it ablaze, or worse, relatives requested that the house be burned down in a controlled fire. The decision was approved by David Bain himself, who agreed to this controversial move. While it might seem illogical to burn down a crime scene, the family and authorities wanted to prevent further tragedy or vandalism. Within minutes of the fire service beginning the controlled burn, the old wooden Bain family home was engulfed in roaring flames. The blaze quickly consumed the house, erasing the physical space where such a horrific tragedy had unfolded.
I'm standing more than 100 meters away from the fire, yet I can still feel the intense heat of the flames. The house was consumed by towering flames for more than an hour. The fire could be seen over most of the city. It burned 17 days after Arawa, Laniet and Stephen Cullen Bain were killed, along with parents Robin and Margaret. Relatives say they did not burn the house for emotional reasons or to cleanse the property. It was the quickest way to make way for a sale.
Now, the legality of this fire has been questioned by at least one legal expert, who raised serious doubts about whether all the proper legal steps were followed. For instance, who exactly owned the house at the time? Were all the loose ends properly tied up before such an irreversible action? These questions remain unanswered. However, a trustee involved with the case told 3 National News that the only surviving member of the Bain family and the man charged with the murders, David Cullen Bain, had actually agreed to the house being demolished by fire. He reportedly told them that he never wanted to see the house again, a sentiment that is understandable given the horrific events tied to it. Still, with the house now reduced to ashes, the investigators could only rely on the evidence they had already gathered. No further forensic work could be done on the physical crime scene, as it no longer existed. And frankly, I find the decision to burn the house down so quickly baffling and, quite frankly, foolish. One officer working on the case put it plainly: there's a lot of work to be done, and as we all know, if you rush work, you will muck it up. It's better to proceed at a reasonable pace. Burning a crime scene before thoroughly investigating it risks destroying vital clues that could make or break a case. How the family managed to get permission to burn down a crime scene so fast, or why anyone even thought it was a good idea, remains a total mystery. Despite all this, the wheels of justice kept turning. Almost 1 year to the day after the massacre, in May of 1995, David's trial finally began. Prosecutors came well prepared and carefully reconstructed a chilling timeline of the horrific morning. According to their version, David woke at 5 o'clock in the morning to the familiar buzz of his alarm clock. After dressing himself, he put on a pair of white opera gloves, a strange and unsettling choice, and retrieved his rifle along with the ammunition from his wardrobe. Using a spare key, he unlocked the gun's trigger lock, effectively readying himself for what would become a brutal and bloody spree. The prosecution painted a harrowing picture. David systematically shot his mother, then his two sisters, and finally his younger brother. During a violent struggle with his brother Stephen, David lost a lens from his glasses and suffered several injuries himself. Blood from the victims soaked into David's clothes, a damning detail prosecutors emphasized to prove his involvement. Trying to cover his tracks, David supposedly threw the bloodied clothes into the washing machine, started a cycle, took a shower, and changed into fresh, clean clothes. These actions explain the pools of blood found scattered throughout the laundry room and bathroom, places no one would expect unless someone was desperately trying to erase evidence. After this grim cleanup, David reportedly went about his usual morning routine, leaving the house at 5:45 to deliver newspapers as if nothing was wrong. Upon returning home at approximately 6:42, he went upstairs and switched on the computer at 6:44, then typed a message. Then he waited for his father, Robin, to return. Robin was known to enter the house from his caravan at exactly 7 o'clock every morning to pray, and tragically, that day was no different. Prosecutors argued that David hid behind a curtain in the lounge, silently waiting for his father to kneel nearby. At the precise moment he shot Robin at point-blank range. Afterward, David allegedly staged the scene to make it look like Robin had taken his own life. Only then did he make the call to emergency services, feigning shock and despair. This call coincided with the 24-minute gap David claimed he had zoned out, unsure of what to do next. But David's story told a very different tale. He told the court that he had gotten up at his usual time, prepared for his paper route, and left the house with his dog. Upon returning around 6:42, he said he went straight to his room, took off his shoes, and went downstairs to wash his hands. While he admitted putting his clothes into the washing machine, he denied they had any blood on them. Heading back upstairs, he claimed he noticed bullets and the rifle's trigger lock lying on the floor. Frantically, he searched the house and found his mother, sisters, and brother all dead in their bedrooms. His father was also dead, lying in the lounge. According to David, he then zoned out for about 20 minutes before finally calling emergency services. Additionally, David's defense team proposed a shocking alternative, that Robin, the father, was actually the killer. According to their theory, Robin had killed his family before turning on the computer to type a message and then had taken his own life. It was a bold claim, but several parts of David's story just didn't add up. For one, David himself admitted he was the only person who knew where the key to the rifle's trigger lock was hidden. Adding to the suspicion was the precise time the computer had been switched on, the unexplained injuries David had sustained, and the mysterious 20 minutes he claimed to have zoned out after discovering the bodies. The prosecution, meanwhile, argued that David's motive was financial. They claimed he wanted to inherit the family fortune. His parents had put away a large sum of money intended for a new house. Ultimately, David Bain was found guilty on all 5 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 16 years. Now you might think the story ends there. A horrific family massacre, an obvious suspect, and a clear sentence. Case closed, book shut. But you'd be wrong. Over the months and years that followed, David Bain's case captured the attention of many. News of the Bain family massacre spread like wildfire across the nation, and public opinion about who was really to blame was sharply divided. One of the most vocal supporters of David's innocence was Joe Karam, a former rugby star who played for the All Blacks from 1972 to 1975. Having retired from professional sports, Joe had developed a deep interest in the case during his more relaxed years. Joe was convinced David was innocent and he didn't keep quiet about it. After David's sentencing, Joe visited him more than 200 times in prison. He even wrote 4 books about the case, tirelessly researching and applying pressure on the justice system. His efforts eventually led to a major breakthrough, an appeal to the Privy Council. This appeal began in May of 2007, 12 years after David had first been imprisoned. It was a monumental and cataclysmic moment in the case. The Privy Council, which is based in London, found that a serious miscarriage of justice had occurred. They ordered David's convictions to be quashed and scheduled a new trial. The council argued there was significant doubt David would have been convicted if crucial evidence discovered after the original trial had been presented to the jury. Most of this new evidence was information the jury had never even heard about. For example, a witness named Dean Cottle, who was a friend of Lanett, one of the victims, revealed something explosive. According to Dean, Lanett had confided in him about an incestuous relationship with her father, Robin. Just days before the massacre, she had traveled home to confront the family with this horrific secret. This testimony suggested a possible motive for Robin, but the judge in the original trial ruled Dean's evidence as hearsay and labeled him an unreliable witness. As a result, this crucial story was suppressed and never reached the jury. As time passed, even more disturbing facts came to light. Robin had reportedly published brutal and sadistic stories written by his pupils in a school newsletter. One of these stories even involved a fictional family massacre. There's a 46-page document detailing the many wrongdoings of the first trial, too much to cover here, but it paints a clear picture of how unfair the original trial was. None of this information was available to the jury in 1995, which meant David's defense team couldn't properly shift suspicion towards Robin. Because of this, David was granted bail and allowed to remain out of prison while awaiting the new trial. While waiting for his retrial, David Bain experienced a brief taste of freedom that must have felt almost surreal after spending over a decade behind bars. For 3 months, he lived with Joe Karam and then moved to Auckland. This fleeting sense of liberty was likely a bittersweet luxury, shadowed by the heavy knowledge that his nightmare was far from over. 2 years later, in March of 2009, David's retrial commenced, forcing him and everyone connected to the case to relive the horrors all over again. Once again, David pleaded not guilty to the 5 murder charges, and once again, his defense argued that Robin, the father, was the true killer who had turned the gun on himself. But this time, the defense brought forward far more compelling evidence suggesting why Robin might have committed such a chilling act. They detailed how Robin had sunk into a deep and morbid depression, exhibited alarming behavior that concerned colleagues and friends, and, most importantly, uncovered the secret at the heart of it all. Lanett's dark and hidden truth, which she was allegedly ready to reveal to the family just before the massacre. This secret, steeped in horror and despair, painted a picture of a man pushed to the edge by desperation and shame. The retrial dragged on for 3 grueling months, filled with testimony, arguments, and re-examinations of every detail. Yet despite the lengthy process, the jury's decision was astonishingly swift. Less than a day after deliberation, they returned with a unanimous verdict of not guilty. After spending 13 years in prison and 2 additional years under legal suspicion, David Bain was finally free. Since then, he has lived outside the prison walls, rebuilding his life piece by piece. However, the case continues to divide opinion sharply. There are still many details that make it hard to believe David's innocence. His bloody fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. Fresh injuries appeared on his body with no explanation, and Stephen's blood was discovered on clothes David had washed and denied having stained. And what about the mysterious 20 minutes David claimed to have zoned out for? How does one explain that lapse during such a horrific day? More tellingly, experts have widely agreed that the angle of Robin's fatal wound made it almost impossible for him to have taken his own life. So if Robin didn't kill himself, then who was responsible? Adding to the suspicion is the fact that David gave permission to burn down the family home, the very scene of the murders. To many, that act alone speaks volumes. Even David's girlfriend at the time said he had a premonition something terrible was about to happen shortly before the killings, which seems too coincidental to ignore. Yet, on the flip side, there are equally convincing reasons to believe Robin might have been the true culprit. Robin was reportedly deeply unhappy with his life, and if Lanyett's secret was true, he could have been overwhelmed with panic and fear. Shell casings were found in his caravan, and the disturbing, sadistic stories revealed by his colleagues painted the portrait of a man unraveling mentally and emotionally. This case remains one of New Zealand's most polarizing, sparking intense debate over who truly committed the murders. Personally, I'm fascinated by the complexity and would love to know your thoughts. Do you believe David was guilty, or do you think Robin was the one responsible? Or could there possibly be another explanation we haven't considered? The financial cost of this case was staggering. Taxpayers shelled out over $7 million, with the retrial alone costing more than $4 million, making it the most expensive trial in New Zealand's history. Joe Karam, David's unwavering advocate, lost over $500,000 personally supporting the cause. David himself sought compensation for his wrongful imprisonment. Given the high-profile nature of the case, New Zealand's Justice Minister brought in overseas judges to review the application. The review recommended compensation, but bureaucratic delays meant that the case was handed back and forth between ministers. 6 long years of red tape and delays passed before David was finally awarded $925,000 in 2016 to settle the matter. During all this turmoil, David rebuilt his life. He found work as an engineer, fell in love, married, had a child, and legally changed his name. Rumor has it that the family eventually moved to Australia, perhaps to escape the long shadow cast by the case. As for the Bain family home, no trace remains of the original property that was burned down in 1994. The site has since been completely transformed into a landscaped, modern 3-bedroom house, erasing the physical memory of what happened there. Over the decades, the story of the Bain family massacre and all its related evidence have faded into the distant past, becoming almost like a dark legend whispered about but rarely confronted. And so the saga concludes, or does it? This case still leaves us with more questions than answers, and the truth remains elusive. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.